Shonen Jump is known around the world for its massive, sprawling stories, with chapter and episode counts frequently dipping into the triple digits, even for relatively short and punchy series like Demon Slayer. But achieving that success has required a willingness to fail, fast and frequently. Their editorial board has canceled more manga than you've even thought about reading. A couple years back, I read quite a few of those in an effort to figure out what separates Jump's biggest earners from its total write-offs. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned from Jump over the years is you never let a successful idea go after one try. So today, we're doing it again. From humble little sports manga that apparently couldn't, to the spectacularly failed spiritual successor to anime's most famous ninja's dad, to the first bizarre adventure of an absolute legend and beyond. This is Volume 2 of canceled Shonen Jump manga. But today's sponsor is nothing like its subject matter. For while these manga were fleeting, ephemeral things, it is eternal. As far back as your watch history stretches, countless creators have sung its praises, and countless more will until the YouTube servers shut down. When the last glacier disappears and the seas rise to swallow our civilization, the survivors will still be hooked on its intense PvP and PvE action, marveling at its incredible graphics and debating which of its over 800 playable champions is the coolest. Millennia hence, when the sun dims and the last long winter sets in, on the final flickering mobile phone screen or PC monitor, you can play it on both, its title shall be emblazoned: Raid Shadow Legends. I tried the game out for the first time to get footage for this very ad, and then all of a sudden, it was 4 hours later and my phone was dying. The amount of options for building parties and characters is just staggering, and figuring out an optimal 3-star strategy to clear each mission with only 2 champions is a surprisingly compelling optional challenge. From now until November 22nd, Raid is running one of their biggest events yet, the Asgard Divide, which brings Norse gods to the world of Teleria as legendary champions of the mysterious and powerful Fae. Anyone who plays the game can unlock Loki the Deceiver for free simply by logging in for 7 days between now and the end of the event, and if you complete certain in-game activities, you can also earn Thor Faehammer, Freya Fate Weaver, and the mighty Odin Faefather, who also appears as a very challenging boss in the limited time event dungeon. Don't miss your chance to experience the Asgard Divide. Click the link in the doobly-doo or scan my QR code to download the game, and you'll get 2 starter packs with free epic champions as an exclusive bonus, unlocking Taugar right from the start and Shonoru at level 15. And once you hit level 13, make sure you come find me under the handle Anime Pope and join my clan, the Basement Dwellers. Before we get into talking about any specific manga, and absolutely eviscerating one in particular that was so bad it made me reevaluate a significant part of my childhood, I'd like to talk about a certain trend in Jump that's claimed more cancellation victims in recent years than any other genre, except perhaps sports. Exorcism has long been a popular subject for shonen series to explore, dating back to Bleach, Soul Eater, Yu Yu Hakusho, and beyond. But ever since Jujutsu Kaisen exploded onto the scene in 2018, a lot of manga have come and gone, trying to chase its success with their own urban fantasy tales of psychically inclined superheroes battling ghosts, or Mononoke, or yokai, or 1,000 other fucking names that writers come up with to differentiate their evil spirits from all the other ones on the market. There's one where the evil spirits are called Manga, and that's appropriate. Back in my last canceled Jump video 2 years ago, I lamented the end of the gorgeously drawn Phantom Seer and Ayashimon, the former a more straightforwardly spooky Exorcist story, while the latter was a raucous battle manga built around the very fun concept of yokai yakuza. And at the same time, I mocked the early demise of Bone Collection, an Exorcist-themed ecchi thing that really missed an opportunity by not being a harem with that title. All three of which were released and canceled in the span of just 2 years, but that's not even the half of it. In that very video, I also had to leave out Durararagon, a manga about Mononoke busting street samurai that got the axe while I was in the middle of doing my writing and researching. And the week before I put the video out, Jump released Tokyo Demon Bride Story, the tale of a cute Oni girl fending off various evil spirits that come to Tokyo wanting to eat the boy that she has a crush on, which made it 32 chapters before it got the axe in April of 2023, 1 month before Jump launched Nue's Exorcist, which, as of this writing, is still going, so good for it, even if I and a lot of people don't think it's very good. But then Shadow Eliminators, which launched just 7 months after that, was axed just this last April, right before the launch of Kyokuto Necromance, a more Pokemon-y type Exorcist story about using captured spirits to fight other spirits that reached its abrupt conclusion 2 weeks ago, with the final boss's cult kidnapping the protagonist in the middle of his first training arc, and then they drag him to their cult private Scientology cruise ship thing. And a few months after that, this random African shamaness, whose brother apparently flooded the world with poke ghosts in response to World War II, shows up to take his grandma's soul hostage and demand that he marry her. The end. No, actually, that is the story beat that it ends on. I felt like I was disassociating when I read that one. It may just be the most obvious, we just got canceled and have no idea what to do ending of all time. But we're still not done yet, because just this summer, in the 20 issues it took for that to be canceled, Jump launched another comedy Exorcist manga called Yokai Buster Murakami and Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi 1 week later, which both haven't been canceled yet, and I really hope that Kiyoshi at least sticks around because it's really fucking funny and the art style is gorgeous. But man, even with JJK ending in a few weeks to make room, the prospects really do not seem good. I mean, you can tell how oversaturated this niche is already just with what I've mentioned so far, but that's not even counting one of Jump Plus's biggest series, Dandadan, which I talked about in my video on Jump's future just a month ago, or Goku Rakugai, the MAGA one, which many mentioned in the comments of this video as a very promising new series from Jump's monthly sister magazine, Jump Square, which also currently runs Blue Exorcist and Dark Gathering and Kemono Jihen, which is more of a supernatural detective story thing, but that's kind of splitting hairs. We're counting Yu Yu Hakusho in this. And let's not forget Ghost Reaper Girl, which has been on indefinite hiatus since last November, but is still counted as part of Jump Plus's lineup and will presumably resume at some point whenever the creator feels less depressed. Including JJK, that is 11 exorcism-focused or adjacent manga currently being published by Shueisha alone, ignoring all other shonen periodicals, and it would have been 13 if I'd done this 2 weeks ago when Necromance and Twin Star Exorcists were still going. There's only so much room on any given bandwagon, even the absolutely huge ones, and this close to capacity, even manga with great art and stories aren't safe from the old Jump hatchet. I still think all the time about what could have been if the right studio had picked up Ayashimon or Phantom Seer, if those action scenes got the Sakuga love they deserve, though of course they might also have been snagged by a second-rate studio with a third-rate animation director. In reality, things don't always work out how you imagine they will, but you'll never know what'll happen if you don't face your fear of failure head on and take a proper swing at it. That's the ultimate lesson at the heart of Jump's recently short-lived golfing manga, Green, Green, Greens, though the message takes on a decidedly more bittersweet taste in light of the manga's own failure, especially when you contrast it against the very hopeful image of its hero dominating the PGA Masters tournament that kicks the whole thing off. In the end, all Haku Yaesaki manages to accomplish by the time his series is over is caddying for his crush in one tournament that she loses, and buying one club of his own in the very last chapter as a symbol of his first real commitment to golf as a career goal. He only actually plays the game one time in a friendly outing with his coworkers, where he only actually wins one hole. On paper, it's an absolute wet fart of a story, a prologue that goes nowhere and leaves basically every one of its characters with a completely uncertain future. But, it's a manga, so I guess also on paper. The execution of that story is absolutely masterful and left me feeling more satisfied than damn near anything else I've read for either of these videos. What I think that satisfaction comes down to is that Yaesaki is just a really damn good protagonist. He starts out believing that dreams like sports stardom are the exclusive domain of prodigies, something he can appreciate from afar but never have for himself. But then he learns from his most passionate dreamer of a classmate and her very charming co-workers at the local driving range that all forms of genius are at least 99% perspiration. It's not the fact that Tiger Woods touched a golf club with his miracle genius hands that makes that club worth $600,000. It's the thousands upon thousands of swings that he took to wear down the grooves on that golf club's head to nothing. At first, Yaesaki practices golf just to prove to himself that he can work hard at literally anything, but that quickly develops into a real passion for the sport before he knows it, and instead of seeing the many great golfers who suddenly surround him as demoralizing reminders of what he'll never have, he starts to see markers of the heights that he could reach if he keeps at it. Slowly, he goes from copying their techniques to developing his own, chasing a kind of perfection that's unique to him, which he never could have even envisioned before. And in seeing his friends and rivals fall short of their own goals, he comes to really understand that that's going to be a lifelong journey, even when he becomes a pro. It's a powerful arc, no hole in one, but more than enough to bring the series in sight of the green and set up one hell of a potential birdie. Maybe even an eagle. We'll never know, but he will one day, because he's learned the joy of challenging himself. And for me, knowing that is enough. Well, not enough. I would kill a man with a golf club for more of this manga, but I have no mixed feelings about what we did get in the end, because Kento Terasaka refused to compromise his great characters just to half-ass an ending he didn't have time to reach, something most canceled Jump writers could stand to learn from. I felt the same way at the end of the even briefer Tenmaku Cinema, created by the same brilliant duo who gave us Food Wars, which follows Hajime, a young film geek who finds himself possessed, Yu-Gi-Oh style, by the ghost of a talented yet tragically short-lived screenwriter named Tenmaku. Tasked with finishing the masterpiece Tenmaku died before he could make, plus several other masterpieces along the way, starting with a contemplative little indie film that the ghost is inspired to write after witnessing the impeccable acting chops of Hinaki, Hajime's child star classmate. Hajime starts the story believing it's enough to simply love film from a distance, that he has no business making one of his own and nothing to say even if he did, but when that young starlet falls in love with the script, in order to not disappoint her, he really has no choice but to pull all his film club buddies together and try to make the thing, and in so doing, discovers that he's got a real knack for guerrilla filmmaking. Then, eventually, he tastes the powerful satisfaction of putting your work in front of an audience that really appreciates it, while Tenmaku finally gets at least a taste of the acknowledgement for his work that he was never granted in life, which is sadly where the story ends, save for a few epilogue boxes confirming that one day all the characters will indeed make each other's dreams come true, which, to be honest, are a little schmaltzy, but the journey to those epilogue boxes and the way the story revels in its love for film as an art form and filmmaking as a process on the way there makes it feel satisfying and earned nonetheless. You can tell there was more story left to tell here, places they wanted to take these characters, conflicts they could never get into. Had they had more time, I doubt that Hajime would have taken home nearly that many trophies right after losing his film festival virginity, but it works for what it ultimately is really damn well. It's genuinely educational about how movies are made in a way that makes you want to get out there and make one yourself, or at least some kind of art. And given the pedigree of its creators, it goes without saying that it looks fucking gorgeous the whole way through and has an instantly lovable cast of characters right from the jump. Though it is worth pointing out that despite that pedigree, it's not horny at all, and I sincerely hope that Shunsaiki and Yuto Tsukuda's takeaway from its failure isn't that they need more advanced jiggle physics to sell whatever their next project is. Speaking of manga with less jiggly heroes than their spiritual predecessors though, Kawada, the mangaka behind the deeply underrated Hinomaru Sumo, brought out a new manga about a different combat sport at the end of last summer that was sadly already over midway through last winter, Martial Master Asumi, or MMA for short, which is, of course, the combat sport that the manga's about. And I think that might have been its undoing. Not the pun, the thing it chose to focus on, though it's also its greatest strength. The world of mixed martial arts is equal parts fascinating and awesome, and it allows the series to explore a wide range of fighting styles simultaneously, but that also means it can't really focus on the intricacies of any one specific technique or style of action, and that adds a lot of upfront complexity to the strategies that readers are asked to comprehend to follow the fights, compared to a story about, say, boxing or sumo wrestling. MMA is also a relatively new sport without all that much tradition behind it, meaning that its protagonist, Asumi Nito's journey from wimpy kid with a surprising knack for grappling to true demon in the ring, guided by a mouth-fanged best girl whom I would absolutely let murder me, is kind of forced to fall back on that most rote of shonen hero tropes of a guy discovering that he fucking loves fighting and the never-ending pursuit of greater strength. You know, Goku stuff, which can be very compelling and totally is in this manga, but also makes it hard to really set a hero apart from all the other martial arts guys in the shonen space. Or at least that's the best explanation that I can come up with for why MMA might have failed to find a big enough audience, because in basically every respect, this manga fucking rules. The fights are both thrilling and strategic, the art is gorgeous, every character is memorable and interesting, even the jobbers who only show up for one chapter, and the rivalry at the heart of it all between Nito, who learned how to fight while looking after his dementia-addled grandpa, and his older brother Kazuro, who turned his back on the entire family to become an MMA pro when their grandpa started to decline, is just impeccable. The mystery of why he left, the way he inserts himself into the role of a heel and goads his brother on to make full use of his potential and fuel a potentially very lucrative rivalry narrative in the MMA media. Instead, it's just pretty good, with an ending that does provide satisfying answers to the series' biggest questions, but kind of lacks a proper build-up, and a series of solid fights that kind of cut off right when the audience's understanding of the sport has built up enough to get really interesting. Martial Master Asumi is a tale of lost potential that hurts a lot to think about, but it's also exactly the kind of story that I like diving into Jump's slush pile to find. A hidden gem with truly untapped potential that's obvious just looking at it. In a similar vein, if I'd never set out to make this video, I never would have experienced one of the most obscure stories from one of my all-time favorite writers. Back in 2014, Ryogo Narita, the creator of Baccano and Durararagon, teamed up with artist Amano Yoichi to create a Shonen Jump series of his very own, Stealth Symphony, which turned out to be an absolutely beautiful mess. Set in a truly inventive fantasy world that was once ruled by a race of mostly invincible shape-shifting dragon dictators until one day a legendary hero rose up from the slave class to send them all packing to the moon, the series follows this plucky yet incredibly unlucky young orphan named Jig as he comes to the former dragon capital of Jinbocho, which looks suspiciously like Tokyo, in hopes of finding someone who can remove his robot backpack life support system, which is the only thing keeping him alive, but also has a built-in defense system that has an unfortunate habit of making a lot of people around him dead. To aid in his journey through the dangerous city, he hires an invisible man named Troma as a bodyguard, but not for him. His job is to stop the backpack from murdering anyone on Jig's behalf, and after Troma ends up saving the life of an assassin who Jig's orphanage director sent to murder him and steal the backpack back, even though he gave him the backpack to keep him alive in the first place, the kid settles into the big magic city to start looking for a job, and finds out very quickly that the rules in Jinbocho are basically anything goes as long as the cops don't see it. Stealth Symphony is a truly unique story with decidedly strange characters who defy and subvert your typical shonen tropes and even morality at every turn. Troma, for example, as a completely invisible and hollow being, is a person with literally no ideals or beliefs of his own, as happy to guard an arch-villain as he is a hero. And once Jig finds a job, the story's second arc ends up pitting them against each other, with Troma guarding a convoy of human traffickers transporting test subjects for unethical pharmaceutical experiments. Stealth Symphony is dark and subversive on a level that almost makes Hunter x Hunter look bright and optimistic, but it also lacks the clarity of direction and purpose that makes that series work for a typical shonen audience. Jinbocho is a wild setting full of crazy and colorful, spoopy Halloween-themed characters, and instead of focusing in on any one core group of them that the audience could then connect with, the story just almost immediately starts bouncing all over the place between them in a way that will feel very familiar to anyone who likes Baccano or Durararagon. And while that structure does work wonderfully in a light novel, I think it's just a bit too chaotic to hold together in the condensed 19-page chapter format of a weekly shonen manga. Unless you're talking about One Piece, of course, but that series had years to build up enough reader familiarity with its world and characters to split the cast up like that. So I don't think it's all that surprising that in the end, Stealth Symphony just couldn't keep Jump's readers engaged. But it is disappointing because the series was absolutely bursting at the seams with cool ideas and genuinely shocking twists that it barely had time to explore or even set up before it all wrapped up. If you fuck with Narita's other stories, I think it's worth reading just to see how crazy his plans were and experience some more of his consistently S-tier character writing, but do be prepared to walk away feeling more than a little confused and let down. You could feel a lot more let down reading a new Jump serialization from an established author, though, and way more confused. Clocking in at 43 chapters, 5 tankobon volumes long, you wouldn't clock Samurai 8 as a colossal failure just looking at its numbers alone. But when you look at its artwork, you immediately see what the problem with those numbers really is, because this isn't some novice mangaka's first crack at serialization. reputation, it's the spiritual successor to Naruto. Shonen Jump clearly thought this thing would be big, maybe even the next big thing. Not only did they slap it on the cover for its debut, they teased that debut out with 8 straight weeks of color page comics following a mysterious red ball as it travels through the manga's gorgeously rendered universe to arrive at the start of its story. They tried every trick in the book and invented some new ones to hype this thing up, and the result of that was Volume 1 selling 15,000 copies in its first week and 40,000 in a month, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize that Boruto #1 sold 10 times that many, which is still just a third of what Naruto sold at its peak. More readers fell off Boruto by Volume 2 than bothered to try Kishimoto's new thing in the first place. Or rather, the million-plus people who buy every issue of Jump probably did try it on account of the big marketing push, but over 95% of them gave up on it before Volume 1 was even out. And honestly, I can't blame them. This thing is legitimately hard to read, and I am not just talking about the quality or cringiness of the writing. Though to be clear, I am also talking about that a lot. Instead of Kishimoto-sensei himself, Samurai 8 was drawn by Akira Okubo, one of the assistants who helped bring Naruto's crazy, detailed world to life. And with all due respect, you can tell this was drawn by a background artist. The level of detail in the individual panels is nothing short of incredible, but the page compositions are an incomprehensible mess. There's no clear focal points in most of the panels or lines of action to guide your eyes through each scene. It was hard enough to make sense of on my high contrast OLED phone screen. I can't imagine how bad it must have looked on the faded ass phone book pages of the actual magazine. Later chapters do improve on this problem, and the last few even have some legitimately great pages in them, but it's ultimately too little way too late. For Kishimoto's part in this, I can totally imagine him wanting a break from the full workload of that weekly shonen grind after doing it for nearly 2 decades. That shit is exhausting. But what I can't imagine is a worse application of his particular skill set than turning in rough storyboards for another guy to ink and clean up. It was the fine craftsmanship of Kishimoto's finished art that made Naruto special. The way he could make characters just pop off the page with shading and line weighting. Not a particularly impressive approach to page layouts or especially writing. And without that hands-on touch, his stories just don't have the same spark. It's like hiring Zack Snyder to write a screenplay but not direct the thing, and also then going on to just film his first draft without any further editing. At first blush, the story seems to have a simple and solid enough emotional hook, exploring the contentious yet loving family dynamic between Dr. Furuta and his housebound son Hachimaru, this feeble bubble boy who dreams of becoming a big, strong samurai one day, even though right now he can only experience that in VR video games. But we only actually see them together and experience that dynamic for 6 out of the over 70 pages in Chapter 1 before they get split up to be simultaneously and separately exposition dumped on about how samurai are cyborgs granted immortal regenerating bodies by the great warrior god Fudo Myo-o, who scattered special robot balls with knives stuck in them all over the galaxy, and if you do a seppuku with one of those knives, it turns into a robot spine key that stores all your memories and personality in that cyborg body, but only if you're compatible. Otherwise, you just die when you do it. But if you are compatible, you also get a samurai soul energy core thing that can turn into a cool lightsaber katana if you stick it on the end of a robot bone that you can pull out of a robotic pet. If you use your samurai wishing powers to turn that pet into a robot mount first, which can also then turn into samurai armor and guns and stuff, and some of the mounts are like spaceships, and the red ball guy from those 8 prequel comics is actually a robot cat guy who's actually the dog samurai guy from the VR game that Hachimaru's #1 in the leaderboards for, which is actually a Last Starfighter style samurai training program that the cat designed to help him with his quest to track down the spine keys of 7 special samurai chosen ones, which, if you bring them together, open this magic box that saves the universe. And yes, we are still talking about just the exposition from chapter 1 here. We haven't even gotten into the other magic box that destroys the universe if you open it, which the bad samurai guys have made 7 chosen one clones to open, but then there was accidentally an 8th one of those, and that's Hachimaru, and he stole exactly 12.5% of all his brother's chosen oneness, so now they gotta murder him to get it back before they can open that box, but that's all fleshed out slightly later on. As for the actual plot of chapter 1, Furuta goes out to try to buy one of those seppuku balls to incorporate into Hachimaru's life system, but the Ronin he tries to buy it from decides to take him hostage instead and use him to force Hachimaru to kill himself so that he can get the samurai soul that's secretly powering the life support system currently. But for some reason, when he does it, he decides to make him do it with that special knife that turns you into a cyborg samurai, so he turns into a cyborg samurai and kills the Ronin instead. And that's it. That's the entire story of the chapter. Please take note of how long it took me to summarize relative to all the other crap that's in there. This first draft vibe doesn't just come from the extremely lopsided story structure, though. The script is also just riddled with the most obvious placeholder dialogue I have ever read. Take this spread from chapter 2, for example, where Hachimaru finally takes to the skies on his robot cat dog and sees the world open up to him for the very first time in his life. It's an awe-inspiring vista meant to fill the reader with a sense of adventure, and you know that because he literally says, "This is awesome, I'm filled with the thrill of adventure." Kishimoto even managed to find a lazier way to write women and relationships in this one. We soon learn that every samurai in the galaxy, except a lot of ones who aren't for no apparent reason, are fate-bound to whichever magic princess used her special Princess Truffle Hog powers to dig up the locker ball that he used to transform, and thus must find and protect her in order to reach the true heights of his power, which seems like kind of a poetic statement about how fighting for others makes us stronger ourselves at first, until we find out that samurai have actual unironic RPG stat screens built into their operating systems, and princesses have the power to cast a buff that multiplies their stats by exactly 8. I know using the word objectification really sets a lot of people on edge these days, but this story basically treats a samurai's fated girlfriend as a piece of RPG equipment of equal importance to his transforming robot horse armor and magic laser sword. I don't know if there's a better word for it. To Kishimoto's credit, he does try to walk that back a bit in the last arc by having Hachimaru and his princess talk things out and affirm that they actually like each other for personal reasons and not just because a samurai has to have a princess and vice versa. But the princess's reason for liking Hachimaru is just that he reminds her of her dead brother, and the catalyst for the whole conversation is that Hachimaru thinks he's about to get princess cucked by the manga's only black guy samurai, who then stands off to the side with a wise smile on his face saying, literally, "It looks like my job here is done," when they make up. So, not that much credit. Okay, so clearly the story is a hodgepodge of mind-numbing cliches and convoluted lore dumps. The page layouts are so poor they physically hurt to read at points, and most of the characters make Naruto's women look well-rounded, while the women are somehow even worse than that. But this is Kishimoto we're talking about here, so at least it's gotta have some cool fights, right? In theory, a new manga represents a great opportunity to not just explore different styles of action than Naruto could do, but roll back to that early Naruto power level where Kishimoto did some of his sickest and most creative fight work. But in practice, the samurai Sith Lord's Walmart Darth Vader casually slices the moon in half on his way to murder Hachimaru by like chapter 10, and the action kind of just keeps on escalating from there, which definitely leads to some really cool planet-busting visuals. Also, a very silly one where a samurai carves a little winky face into the surface of a planet, but doesn't really leave all that much room for interesting strategy or fight choreography. And the story's justification for how Hachimaru is able to take all these guys on within like a few weeks of suddenly not being an invalid is actually, I am not joking here, he's just that good at video games. Like, there's even a page where he almost literally says, I've realized that actual fighting and video games are exactly the same, which, sure, why not? Brock Lesnar, if you're watching this, name a time and place, and I'll show you what it takes to beat Sekiro. The one thing Samurai 8 genuinely does have going for it, the one place where it might even surpass Naruto, is in its ending, which Kishimoto clearly had planned out from the beginning. There's some very cool payoffs in both imagery and themes to stuff that he set up way back in Chapter 1, and it really puts Hachimaru through the ringer in a very compelling way. And even in the rushed, contrived state in which it arrives, it manages to make the final escalation to literally godlike power levels feel properly earned. It's just a real shame that absolutely nothing Kishimoto wrote leading up to it is worth a damn, and the ultimate payoff for it all mostly seems like a setup for a much better manga that obviously he's never gonna get to make now, which, given what you have to get through to get there, is just kind of one more kick in the teeth at the end when you sit there and think about it. Which is not the note I want to end this video on, so let's shift gears one last time to talk about a different manga legend, Hirohiko Araki, and the first crack he took at serialization before JoJo defined that legend. If the success of a work of art is measured by its legacy rather than its sales, then Bao the Visitor might just be the most successful failure to ever grace the pages of Jump, earning a gorgeous 45-minute original video adaptation by Studio Piero 4 years after it concluded in 1989, plus a fully playable cameo 2 decades later in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle. On top of that, Dio, no relation, the final boss of the SNK fighting game World Heroes 2, is an explicit homage to the work of Araki that uses Bao as a basis for his design and whole power set, and over at SNK's biggest rival, though in a completely different genre, Bao's freaky bioweapon designs and the general vibe of the secret underground laboratories under pharmaceutical shell companies where those bioweapons were designed have distinct echoes in Resident Evil, though I put that mostly down to shared heritage over direct influence, since both series draw very heavy inspiration from Kamen Rider. Although Resident Evil 1's Joseph was named after the Joey Jojo of Part 2, so they are Araki fans over there, and anything's possible. Bao's superhero origin story is an almost beat-for-beat ripoff of Kamen Rider, though. Ikuro Hashizawa is an ordinary teenager turned into an experimental superweapon by a secret society of megalomaniacs and mad scientists that he escapes before they can brainwash him, and goes on to spend the rest of his life fighting. Though instead of having Nazi ties like Shocker, Dress is backed by wealthy American businessmen and politicians using Japan as a test bed to get a leg up in the arms market, so slightly different in the lore details. You can of course also look at Bao as a prototype for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, since it leans into the same sort of over-the-top bloody violence that would eventually set that series apart from most of its shonen contemporaries, as well as the distinctly biological, pseudoscientific approach to power systems that defined the first 2.5 parts of JoJo when it was all about the vampires. Araki put a lot of thought into how Bao could secrete face-melting acid from his hands without destroying his own cells, and even managed to tie that function into the hero's healing factor in a very clever and credible way. But then he also gave him 60,000 volt bioelectricity powers basically out of nowhere, and justified the fact that he can output nearly 100 times as much as an electric eel by saying, quote, His cells are really strong. I'd say never change Araki, but clearly he never did, and I f***ing love him for it. You can also see hints of his future obsession with psychic powers in Bao's sidekick, Sumire, a 9-year-old girl who uses her precognitive and automatic writing abilities to help them both escape from Dress's transport train at the start of the story and evade the organization's assassins from then on. As well as in the manga's final boss, Walken, a Native American warrior from the Skookum tribe who uses his power to psychically excite molecules to both insta-melt steel walls and human faces and heat up his coffee. He can also use that coffee to predict the future, but only in the OVA. It's not canonically part of his power set, just a narrative convenience to help condense the story and cut out the less necessary parts where Bao fights, for example, a mutant cyborg bonobo and a swarm of pheromone bats designed to overpower his ability to smell evil, which he uses to navigate when he's transformed instead of eyes, because obviously he wouldn't be able to see with all that cool looking yellow stuff in front of his eyes. Araki thinks stuff out. That's why he's one of the goats. And to be clear, there are no fights in Bao that aren't 10 out of 10 certified Araki bangers, but something had to give to cut 2 volumes of content down to a tight 45 minutes. And it's honestly really impressive how well this story scales down in general. The OVA plays as a complete, if slightly threadbare story despite everything that it has to cut out, and every step of the manga's escalation feels totally organic, both in terms of Ikuro's gradual mastery of his powers as he wrestles with the potential loss of his humanity to the Bao parasite, and the way that he goes from fleeing Dress to taking the fight to them like a total badass. There are, of course, clues within the narrative that Araki had much grander plans than he was able to realize. Most obviously, the evil scientist guy states there's a 100-day time limit before Bao's parasite consumes him and infects the world, which we never even come close to and kind of just gets forgotten in the epilogue. But he ties the story beats that are there together so seamlessly, it doesn't feel like anything's missing. If anything, the pacing feels tighter and more deliberate than most parts of JoJo, which tend to pad out their midsections a bit with, you know, just kind of fights for the sake of having fights. Obviously, that iconic generational epic contains most of Araki's greatest writing flexes, but in its own way, Bao clearly demonstrates what a talented storyteller and improviser he really is. If you love JoJo and you haven't read Bao or at least watched the OVA, I cannot recommend either one enough, both as a fascinating evolutionary artifact and just a damn good time in itself. As for why Bao failed with all it had going for it and all the very successful properties with similar ideas that have come out since, I think Bao itself was just a little too similar to Kamen Rider to carve out its own space in the Japanese pop culture landscape, at least before people were familiar with Araki's game. I mean, a lot of people also say that the early parts of JoJo are just Fist of the North Star knockoffs, but the influence there in terms of setting and plot is clearly much less direct, and even if JoJo wasn't an immediate mega hit, it was successful enough that Araki had time to sound out his own ideas and eventually give the series its own truly distinct and enduring identity in the Stand era, which prompted some retrospective looks back at what he'd done before and helped people realize that those early parts of JoJo and Bao, while being, you know, pretty derivative of other stories, were also clear precursors to how he'd eventually change the entire shonen landscape. Or, you know, it could be something else that caused Bao to fizzle. It's hard to say because I, you know, wasn't actually there in late 80s Japan. Countless factors contribute to determining a Jump manga's ultimate fate, but ultimately it always boils down to whether or not it can give readers a compelling reason to buy the book over some other book. Reader surveys, digital analytics, critical reception, all that stuff clearly matters too, but not nearly as much as cold, hard tankobon sales data. So if, hypothetically, you're a big fan of say, Cyberpunk Edgerunners creator Rafal Yaki's extremely cool new urban fantasy manga No Name, like the many readers who've made it #1 on the English Manga Plus app right now. If you want to see that story keep going, the most important thing that you could hypothetically do for it is import Volume 1 from Amazon JP as soon as it goes on sale October 4th, or at least buy the ebook, or some other date for some other manga, because of course I'm just speaking hypothetically here, definitely not trying to put my finger on any scales. Speaking of shameless shilling though, I'm Jeff Raid, professional shadow legend, reminding you to click that link or scan the QR code and download the game today.